Look at this map of Southeast Asia. Right here, in the waters between China and the Philippines, between Vietnam and Malaysia, lies one of the most contested pieces of ocean on Earth, the South China Sea. And what happens in these waters over the next decade could fundamentally reshape global power, determine who controls trillions of dollars in trade, and decide the future of peace in Asia. This is the story of why the world's superpowers are locked in an intense struggle for dominance in one of the most strategically critical regions on the planet. Now, here is the thing. Most people don't realize just how important the South China Sea actually is. When you think about global conflict hotspots, you might think of the Middle East or Eastern Europe. But the South China Sea? It's arguably more critical to the global economy and international stability than anywhere else on Earth. Let me start with the basics. The South China Sea covers an area of about 1.3 million square miles. That's roughly the size of the entire Mediterranean Sea. 9 different countries have claims on parts of this water, and here's where it gets interesting. China claims the vast majority of it. They call their claim the 9-dash line, which basically draws a line around almost the entire sea and says, "This is ours." But Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and Thailand all have overlapping claims. It's like multiple people claiming ownership of the same piece of property, except this property is an entire ocean, and the stakes are unimaginably high. So why does everyone want control of the South China Sea? The answer is simple but profound. First, it's about trade. About 1/3 of all global maritime trade passes through the South China Sea. We're talking about roughly $5.3 trillion worth of goods moving through these waters every single year. Think about that for a second. If China or any single power could control these shipping lanes, they could literally choke off the global economy. They could tax every shipment that passes through. They could deny access to rival nations. They could weaponize commerce itself. Second, it's about resources. The South China Sea sits on top of vast reserves of natural gas and oil. We're talking about potentially 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. In a world where energy security is national security, controlling access to these resources is like holding the keys to global power. Countries need these resources to fuel their economies, to power their militaries, to maintain their standard of living. Without access to energy, modern civilization simply doesn't function. And third, it's about strategic military positioning. If you control the South China Sea, you control the choke points between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. You control the waters through which American military vessels pass. You control the shipping lanes that supply Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. You control the ability to project military power across the entire region. It's not just about economics. It's about raw geopolitical dominance. Now let me break down the specific territorial disputes, because this is where the conflict gets real. China's claim is the most aggressive. That 9-dash line I mentioned, it encompasses about 90% of the South China Sea. China calls this the 9-dash line, but historically it's been described differently by different governments. Regardless of the name, the claim is enormous. And here's the problem. International law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, says that countries can only claim territorial waters extending 12 nautical miles from their coast, and an exclusive economic zone extending 200 nautical miles. Beyond that, the waters are international. But China's claim goes way beyond that. It extends hundreds of miles from the Chinese mainland into areas that are much closer to other countries' coasts. If you're finding this breakdown of global power dynamics fascinating, you need to subscribe right now. Because we're breaking down the geopolitical stories that shape your world, and you're not going to find this level of analysis anywhere else. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because videos like this drop regularly, and you don't want to miss them. Now let's continue breaking down exactly how this conflict is escalating, and what it means for global stability. Vietnam has claims on the Paracel Islands and parts of the Spratly Islands. The Philippines has claims on the Spratly Islands, which they call the Kalayaan Island Group. Malaysia has claims on parts of the Spratly Islands and the continental shelf. Brunei has a small claim. Indonesia, interestingly, doesn't have a direct territorial claim, But they do have maritime interests in the region because the 9-line overlaps with their exclusive economic zone. And Thailand and Singapore are involved because their shipping interests and regional security are affected. Now here's what makes this so dangerous. These aren't just abstract legal disputes. They're real and they're escalating. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration issued a ruling on a case brought by the Philippines against China. The court basically said that China's 9-line has no legal basis under international law. The court ruled in favor of the Philippines on virtually every count. But here's the thing. China rejected the ruling. They said it was invalid. They said the court had no jurisdiction. And they continued with their plans as if the ruling had never happened. That's when you realize how serious this is. We're talking about a major world power openly defying international law and international courts. That sets a precedent. If China can ignore international law in the South China Sea, why can't other countries do the same elsewhere? The entire rules-based international order is at stake. Now, let's zoom out across the broader region and look at the map of Asia to understand why this matters so much to the rest of the world. China has taken tiny reefs and rocks that were barely above water, and they've dredged sand and gravel from the seafloor to build them up into islands. Some of these artificial islands are now several hundred acres in size. On these islands, China has built military installations, airfields, radar stations, anti-ship missile systems, hangars for fighter jets. Basically, they've turned these artificial islands into military bases. And they've done this across multiple locations throughout the South China Sea. The scale of this operation is staggering. It's one of the largest military construction projects in the world. And it's all designed to project Chinese power across the entire region and enforce China's territorial claims. Because here's the thing, this isn't just a regional issue. The United States is deeply invested in freedom of navigation through the South China Sea. American military vessels regularly transit these waters. American allies like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines depend on these shipping lanes. If China controls the South China Sea, the entire balance of power in Asia shifts dramatically in China's favor. The United States would lose its ability to project power in the region. American allies would be vulnerable to Chinese pressure. The entire post-World War II international order in Asia, which has been built on American military dominance, would be fundamentally undermined. And that's why the United States has been conducting freedom of navigation operations. American naval vessels deliberately sail through areas that China claims, but that are actually international waters. The message is clear. We don't recognize your claims. These are international waters, and we will continue to exercise our rights to navigate freely. China sees these operations as provocative. The United States sees them as essential to maintaining international law. And this is where the risk of actual military conflict comes in. Imagine a scenario where a Chinese fighter jet intercepts an American naval vessel. A tense confrontation occurs. Someone makes a mistake. A shot is fired. Suddenly, you've got a military incident between two nuclear-armed superpowers. And it all started over a disputed piece of ocean. That's the real danger here. It's not just about economics or resources or trade. It's about the potential for actual military conflict that could escalate into something far more serious. The smaller nations in the region face an impossible situation. The Philippines, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian nations have legitimate territorial claims based on international law. But they're facing off against China, a superpower with vastly superior military capabilities. They can't win a military conflict, so they're trying to play a careful diplomatic game, strengthening ties with the United States, working with other Southeast Asian nations, and appealing to international law. But at the end of the day, they're in a precarious position. The South China Sea is also one of the richest fishing grounds in the world. Millions of people in Southeast Asia depend on fishing for their livelihoods. But as China asserts control, Chinese fishing vessels increasingly operate in disputed areas, and there have been numerous incidents of harassment. This is part of China's salami slicing strategy. Take small actions just below the threshold of triggering major military response. Do it repeatedly. Gradually change the facts on the ground. Eventually, your claim becomes accepted reality. Now you understand why the South China Sea is truly a hotbed of conflict, and why the world's superpowers are locked in an intense struggle for dominance in this region. This is about the future of global dominance. This is about who controls the world's most critical trade routes. This is about whether international law and international institutions matter, or whether might makes right. This is about the future of peace in Asia, and potentially the world. And it all comes down to a stretch of ocean in Southeast Asia that most people have never heard of. But now you know. Now you understand the stakes. If you found this breakdown valuable, please subscribe to the channel. We're covering the geopolitical stories that shape global power every single week. And if you want to dive deeper into how these power dynamics play out in specific regions, watch the next video in the playlist. It's going to blow your mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.